Well, Stephen, thank you so much for helping with my project. I was wondering if you could start off by saying a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. There's not a whole lot about me. I would like to think that my career in human capital has been that of most rewarding to me. I'm a first generation American, came over here from Cuba to escape communism, and here I am 50 years later. So I found aerospace as a career. My dad was in aerospace for the government for probably 30 years. And I've been in an aerospace capacity for the past year, but I've been working with NASA and NASA contractors for a while from a people point of view, supplying people.
So can you talk a little bit more about the work that you do and how you go about finding, human capital?
Sure. Space is not just, it's not the final frontier anymore, it's the next frontier. So given that it's a lot easier to get into lower Earth orbit in space now than it used to be. I mean, there's ride share, there's different, it's not just NASA that sends people up into space now. So with it becoming more accessible through the likes of SpaceX, Richard Branson, etc., there is an entire subculture of individuals who live, eat, sleep, and breathe all things space. So once you tap into that subculture and become connected, people seek you out, believe it or not. I mean, there's search engine optimization that leads people directly to me, depending on how I'm utilizing the social media, the various social media, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's some of the different niche sites. But I find people who are as crazy, passionate, interested in space as we are, NanoRacks as a company.
And you mentioned you came from Cuba. I was wondering how old you were when you came over.
-8 months.
It's just I heard about 2.5 months ago, SpaceX launched a rocket, a satellite in polar orbit from the Kennedy Space Center, which they haven't done since like the 1960s. I mean, of course, SpaceX didn't do anything in the 1960s, but that's a different story. The U.S. hasn't launched from the polar orbit and since the 60s, because we did launch a satellite that went over Cuba and it actually crashed. I guess the first stage booster or something landed in Cuba and actually killed a cow, and it became like this huge international kind of incident. And I was wondering if you had heard of that.
Yes, but only because I'm in the biz. I probably wouldn't have heard about it if I were just listening to the mainstream news. But yeah, cows, I mean, Cuba's an island, so obviously cows and other capital that aren't naturally occurring on an island that's 90 miles off the coast of Florida, plus the fact that it was a U.S. rocket or something from the United States that killed the cow. You know, it wasn't a bright day, put it that way. But yeah, I heard of it.
So I guess which positions do you find the most challenging to fill in terms of the type of skill sets that you're looking for?
Well, probably flight controller and mission operations, the individuals that actually sit in the mission operations room and communicate with the astronauts and cosmonauts as they're headed up and after they've docked to the space station. Because you won't find someone who has that experience unless they've worked with a NASA. And typically individuals who are working for NASA or working for SpaceX, they're pretty happy where they are. So you have to entice them to want to leave. Or you may find individuals that love what they're doing, but they don't want to work for a government institution. They want to go to the private sector. But typically it's any role that requires specific experience that is only obtained by working for NASA, especially, are the most difficult to, not difficult to find, but they're the most difficult to attract and land.
Are there like educational programs meant to kind of train that specific skill set to kind of, put them through simulations and kind of give them that flight controller type of experience that then feed into these jobs? Or is it something that you have to get into NASA or one of these other human spaceflight programs and through some other means and then kind of work your way into that?
Well, up until recently, Nathan, it's been a chicken and egg type thing. You wouldn't have it unless you worked for NASA, and you wouldn't be prepped for it unless you interned with NASA or did something comparable. Now, with other companies like us that are emerging, we are able to do on-the-job training. But if I were to require 5 years experience, I would have to find somebody who was with NASA for 5 years or was with NASA and then went somewhere else to obtain the experience because it's so new.
Yeah, that sounds like a challenge. I mean, it's like as aerospace begins growing, with all these different companies and players, it seems like it makes it easier for it to grow. Is
Easier, future especially, but living in the present tense, we are still scouring, attracting, fishing in the same pond that everyone is. And now that it's growing and venture capitalists are investing in the next frontier, the pot becomes smaller and smaller. So you really have to be something that is going to attract somebody. You can't just run an ad and expect people to jump into the bucket.
Yeah, I know. SpaceX is really big about promoting every one of their launches and what have you. And there's been a lot of talk about what benefit they get out of that. Is definitely like a recruitment activity. And I know that NanoRacks has been really promoting the Bishop Airlock and even the North Houston Space Society chapter that I'm a part of. We got to go on a tour of it in January and see it before it got completed, and I guess it's been shipped out to the Cape now to be launched, right?
Correct. That's where it is now. Looking forward to it going up in December.
Yeah,
So
pretty exciting. Yeah.
very exciting. Very exciting because you want to be part of something and you want to be part of something big, and being a part of something that's going to be so needed and so highly visible to the public. When I say to the public, like you said, it'll be promoted by SpaceX, it'll be watched on television, and then I'll be able to sit in the mission room, and I can't communicate with an unmanned flight, but once it docks and once the retractable arm goes out and grabs the airlock grabs the satellite and goes to pull it onto the airlock, and I'll be able to watch something that I had a hand in putting together make history. Even if it's a small piece of history, it is exciting to see the way the group came together and really executed this cutting edge type of product.
So I think there's a general consensus that the International Space Station might come to an end of its life in the next decade or so. And I know you have other partners or other players like Axiom Aerospace as an example, who's kind of thinking of creating modules for ISS that would later be free floating and be kind of like the core of their own um, uh, space station. I was wondering if y'all thought of what life of things like the Bishop Airlock and things like that would look like after ISS was ended, or is that still just too far away?
Well, no, you can't ever look at something that has a potential end date as too far away, because then before you know it, it's tomorrow. So yes, I've been in meetings and I listen to the dialogue. But here's the thing, Nathan, if it goes away, it's going to be replaced by something bigger and better. it won't go away. You don't just have something that monumental and something that is changing the way we look at things on terra firma, so to speak, and just say, okay, well, it's over. Back to farming in Oklahoma. I mean, it doesn't go away any more than cars go away. They just change from internal combustion to electrical to solar to back to horse and buggy if we keep depleting the resources, but you know.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of like actual recruiting people to nanoracks, connecting with like the space enthusiasts and what have you. I know there's a lot of people that would love to work in space, but um, maybe they're lacking the skills or the qualifications. Um, oh, I guess how much of that do you have to sort of filter through in order to actually find people that are really skilled? Um,
Well, luckily, Nathan, there's so many programs that prepare individuals for this type of career, and for every person who goes up into space or lower Earth orbit, there's 1,000 people on the ground who made it happen. So the education and the clubs and the different programs that individuals can participate in to prepare them, combined with the attitude and aptitude that we would look for to fit in our culture, that's what we look for more than just, okay, so you have 5 years at NASA. Now, don't get me wrong, we like to see the experience, but I look for things that you can't train people to do. I look for qualities that you have to harness on which you have to harness individuals so that they're telling you how to do it. I mean, you hire great people and don't tell them what to do, right? You hire great people and let them come in and tell you what to do. I'm not sure who said that, Steve Jobs maybe, but we can give them the tools, but the last thing you want to do to somebody who is technically brilliant is to tell them how to do things and limit them on their creativity. You want to let them in, you want to hire them, you want to give them the tools and equip them to take you into the next century, not put reins on them so that you inhibit their creativity and energy.
no, definitely, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so, last year, uh, NASA announced, or I guess it's actually the National Space Council announced that the policy of the United States is to put the first woman and the next man on the moon uh, by 2024. I was wondering, how soon after that announcement did it come to your attention?
Let's see, how many seconds? Our CEO was quite vocal about it within minutes after. And I say within minutes, I really don't know what time of day it was, but I do know that we heard it from him before we heard it on the mainstream media. So it's exciting because that's what we do, right? We're the concierge, we're the not to the stars, but to the stratosphere.
Um, I started this project interviewing regular everyday people. I started last December. I've interviewed people in Houston and Minneapolis and London and York and Edinburgh. Lots of people at coffee shops and what have you. And most of the people that I've talked to did not know we were planning to send people back to the moon. I was wondering if you found that surprising or you kind of expected that.
I don't find it surprising because were I not in the business, I might not have heard of it. Some of the radio stations and radio programs I listen to, they typically make announcements like this. I mean, I'd heard it on Sean Hannity, I'd heard it on the Walton Johnson show locally in the Houston area. So I probably would have known anyway, but my ears might not have perked up as much had I not been in the business. So, plus, when you think about it, Nathan, whether it's because people have been accustomed to it, whether they're desensitized, whether it takes a lot more to impress people these days. I guess now that we've made it to the moon, it doesn't have the same impact on individuals now who carry personal telephones that have 1,000 times the technology that the initial flights to the moon had. So they're not as impressed knowing that it's been done before, but again, knowing how we did it and how it was achieved, the analog systems that were used to get our astronauts and cosmonauts to the moon and into space, it probably just, again, doesn't have the same impact as it would in 1970 when, if you were watching television, something on television, it was either live or pre-recorded and you couldn't TiVo it and watch it later. So
Yeah,
that's one man's opinion.
no, definitely. I think the overwhelming amount of content and the fact that it gets pre-filtered before we even see it, based upon kind of our own interest, or at least the platform's understanding of our interest. So if you've been clicking on space related stuff, it's going to pop up as, top thing. But if you don't, then you may not even see it on your news feed.
Exactly. I mean, my son's 18 years old. Up until recently, he thought that if you had enough money, you could just walk down to NASA, buy a ticket, and go to the moon if you wanted to. And I say recently, up until probably the last 5 years, he thought that commercial space flight was available. And he thought that US government and armed forces, Department of Defense individuals could charter a flight to the moon at any time. Until recently, he didn't know that you have to wait until the angle is correct. You have to wait until the trajectory is there. Plus, when I told him it was 230,000 miles away, he had no idea that it was that far. And then when I put things in perspective, said, for example, my car has 60,000 miles on it and I've owned it for 4 years. 5 times this is what it would take to get to the moon. That's when it really began to impress upon him that the magnitude of getting somebody from the Earth to the moon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. But I mean, in terms of commercial space flight, now with SpaceX, you can actually, if you have $55 million and some change, you can book a ride to the International Space Station.
Sure, you got change for $1 billion bill?
No, actually, that's kind of funny. At the last International Space Development Conference that the NSS had, they had given Jim Bridenstine a $1 billion Zimbabwean note. I'm not sure how much it's actually worth, but apparently there is such a thing as $1 billion notes out there. Talk about inflation.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. You're going to see things change exponentially. I mean, think about the first iPhone to today's iPhone. Think about the first laptop to today's laptops. And once new technology is discovered, and especially now that there's funding for it, you're going to see things change pretty quickly. I mean, thanks to entrepreneurs and visionaries like Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeffrey Mamber. I mean, you're going to see a lot of things change. And again, I couldn't be more excited because I'm in the business. Sorry.
no worries. So, I like to think that the 2020s are going to be to space exploration what the 1990s were to the internet. I mean, in 1990, you would probably have an easier time explaining to somebody why astronauts float versus, what email was or websites were. But by the end of 2000, you were able to, by the end of 2000, everybody knew what email was, everybody knew what websites were. And I feel like in the 2020s, kind of explaining to people how transformative we're going to be by the end of this decade, like things that are going to be routine in 2030 that are unimaginable today. I mean, Virgin Galactic might actually be flying people. Blue Origin might be flying people. SpaceX is flying people, maybe on their Starship. Nanoracks probably can get you your science experiments to Mars or to Venus or to wherever you want. Um, we have people on the moon. Uh, uh, you know, uh, Going into orbit's not really as special of a deal as it used to be. And I was wondering, if you, being on the inside of the industry, if you feel like that 2020s might really be that transformational, or if you feel like that maybe is a little bit over optimistic.
Well, when I look back at when my dad was with ACIC, the Aeronautical Department of the Department of Defense, and I look at today, when we as a nation put our mind on something, put our sights on something, and when the public support rallies behind it, I think that we can accomplish anything. So we're an 11-year-old company. We're a survivor. I mean, whereas where we started along with others. We're still around. Some of them aren't. And we've survived because of the sheer drive of our troops, the sheer determination of our CEO, the excitement and again, not to overuse a buzzword, the sheer passion that we have for lower Earth orbit and all things space. Over the past 3 years, the growth, it eclipsed the growth of the initial 8 years. So if that's a leading indicator, then see, the internet is something that everybody can use. And if you think about back in the day, internet service was what, about $20, $30 a month? It was dial up, etc. When people wanted a better mousetrap, they hurried and they got us better mousetraps. Space isn't necessarily going to be as easily accessible as the World Wide Web because you're talking terrestrial versus extraterrestrial. So let's not get over optimistic, but let's not underestimate the capabilities of the American people, the people of the world.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's a lot different whenever you can make an incremental investment of a few $1,000s and actually start a business versus having to make an incremental investment of several hundreds of millions of dollars to start a business. You have fewer businesses in the latter case.
Right. And think about it, Nathan, unless we get to the point where teleportation is a real thing, or when, I don't want to say faster than light travel is a real thing, because let's table that. But until there's a frictionless way to escape the gravitational pull of the Earth and get 230,000 miles away, or even safely up into orbit where it's as easy as purchasing a plane ticket on Southwest from Houston to Atlanta, it's not within our grasp yet. But when you think that there are thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people working on that becoming a reality every day, the imagination is really your only limitation. One man's opinion, but remember, that's an opinion from the inside based on things I've seen. I mean, I can drive down right now to Webster, Texas, and I could walk into the mission control room and I can have a real-time conversation with someone on the International Space Station. Who would have thought that was doable 10 years ago?
That is awesome. And, I mean, I think before the next end of this decade that you might have, dozens of people in space to talk with at some point.
That would be, again, that would be great. I'd love to see that in our lifetime.
One of the questions that come up whenever I talk to people is, haven't we been to the moon? Why are we going back? What do we hope to get out of it? What's the value of doing that versus addressing a global climate change or poverty or something else? What are your thoughts on that? What value would the average everyday citizen see from us going to the moon?
think about what we might see up there. Think about what we may find as we're collecting atmospheric samples, as we're comparing the ultraviolet rays on the moon, as we get a different perspective of things that affect another being, and I say being, another entity, another, I mean, not a planet, but the Earth, the moon is a satellite of the Earth, right? And it looks like it broke off and formed the crater that's now the Pacific Ocean. So you have something that's rotating the Earth, orbiting the Earth, that orbits the sun. You get a different perspective on the way up, plus the vantage point. You may see something on the Earth that you can't see from anywhere except for outer space. And you may take samples of something from the Earth, from the moon. You may come back with something that's not found on the Earth anymore, something that perhaps has changed with the effect of the lunar winds and space on the moon that might give us a different perspective. So I don't know if I could say without prejudice, well, yes, this is spending money on something that's not going to immediately help climate change, whether man-made or natural, or whether it's going to impact somebody suffering from hunger across the world. But I also don't know that it won't, because we're going up there with the idea that to have a different perspective. So again, it's impossible for me to answer that question unbiased, because I see value in it based on things that happened in the past as byproducts of either space or lower Earth exploration that have helped us today. Microwaves, I mean, images of the Earth based on heat bands. I mean, looking at polar ice caps from 200,000 miles away, all of that study gives us, again, an additional perspective as opposed to just something we can see on the Earth.
I think perspective is going to be the biggest, import we get from space, is this idea of things aren't, a better idea on what the Earth is, where it sits in terms of the universe, and then also the fact that we probably have some blinders that we can't see because we all live in a 24-hour day, have one geogravity, one atmosphere of pressure. When you start having people observing the universe in much different conditions, I just wonder what are some obvious things that we're missing now that they'll see.
But see, they won't be obvious, because with our finite minds, we can't imagine any infinite concepts. With minds that are pretty much trained to believe that what we see is what we get, we're unable to entertain the possibilities of other things existing. I mean, especially if, and regardless of anyone's beliefs, what if we find proof of life other than on Earth? I mean, that would change everything from 5,000 BC to present. That would challenge every belief that most people have on this planet.
Only if they believed it.
Well, and seeing isn't always believing, so I'm with you.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. I think people are able to really insulate themselves from challenging data if they need to.
That's an entirely different conversation, but I agree.
So if it was safe and affordable, would you have an interest in going into space yourself?
I'm not an early adopter when it comes to things that could potentially be life changing. So I would love to see a few dozen successful ventures before I would put myself in a seat headed to the stars.
Like you only need to see a few dozen and then you'd be willing to go to orbit?
I'd need to see a few. I'd need to see a few, and I would need to review the technology, review the risks, see what the training program looked like, and hey, no guts, no glory, but I've kind of become accustomed to sucking in air on a daily basis. So I'd like for a few other brave souls to go before I went, and then I would say, sure, put me in, coach.
So my plan is to take this videos as well as the ones that I recorded before. In addition to putting on my website, countdowntothemoon.org, I'm actually going to put on a micro SD card, which I'm sending to the moon as part of Astrobotics mission next year. So
All right.
people 100 years from now will have this magical technology that will let them recreate the card because of all the radiation damage and everything, and they'll be able to see this video and kind of get thoughts on how people were thinking about the future right before this new space age. And I was curious if you had any thoughts you would want them to know.
Do everything you can to make this world a better place for everyone, and right the wrongs that we've done to Mother Earth, and go forth and prosper.
That's awesome. Oh, I was also wondering, in terms of helping you fill the positions you have at NanoRacks, are there any opportunities for organizations like the North Houston Space Society to kind of feed people your direction?
Well, certainly. I'll be honest, I don't believe I've perused your website as extensively as I probably should have. Do you have job posting, or do you have networking capabilities on your site or in your group?
Not not yet, but we're hoping to do a lot more outreach to like colleges and to high schools, and we have some people who are in various careers wanting to make a move into aerospace. So, and not a large number of people, but definitely a passionate group.
That's the key. Well, consider me as close as a phone if you ever want to piggyback on any of our different social media outlets, etc.
Well, awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
You know, Nathan, I appreciate the time. I also want to make sure that it's known that my opinions are my own, and that I work for an innovative, cutting edge company, but I'm not an engineer. And I listen to what the engineers and the scientists say. And when I say that the opinions are my own, I may not bring 100% accuracy to any of my scientific type claims, but I do work with some of the most brilliant minds in the industry. So I hope I can represent them from a layman's perspective. I know human capital. I don't know space capital.
I mean, we need so many people, and we need people to find the people. So,
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you, Mr. Price.
well, thank you, Stephen. You have a good day, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. I do too. Thanks, Nathan.